Picture this scenario. You're sitting in your car at 2 a.m. in the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store, staring at your bank account balance on your phone, trying to figure out if you can afford to buy both milk and bread this week. You're 43 years old. You've been working for over 2 decades. You make decent money, maybe even good money by most standards, and yet somehow you feel more financially stressed now than you did in your 20s when you were making half as much. Sound familiar? Well, what if I told you that there are specific habits you've probably developed over the past decade that are quietly sabotaging your financial future in ways you might not even realize? Most people think that being broke in your 40s means you're just unlucky or that you made some catastrophic financial mistake. But here's something that might surprise you. There are subtle, seemingly reasonable money habits that are far more destructive than any single big purchase or investment gone wrong. And the crazy part is, most of these habits actually feel responsible when you're doing them. My name is Keith, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, human psychology, and why some people seem to effortlessly build wealth while others stay stuck in the same financial patterns for decades. If you've ever wondered why you still feel financially stressed despite making more money than ever before, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps explain what might be holding you back. Now, before we dive into these 12 habits that might be keeping you poor in your 40s, let me paint you a picture of what financial life typically looks like at this stage. You're supposed to be hitting your peak earning years, right? Your career should be established, your salary should be higher than it's ever been, and you should finally have this money thing figured out. But if you're like most people in their 40s, that's not what's happening at all. Instead, you're dealing with a perfect storm of financial pressures that seem to come from every direction at once. You've got kids who need everything from school supplies to college funds, aging parents who might need financial support, a mortgage that seemed reasonable 15 years ago but now feels crushing, and this nagging feeling that you should be saving for retirement but you can barely keep up with current expenses. And here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something that will probably surprise you. The problem isn't that you're not making enough money. The average household income for people in their 40s is actually at an all-time high when adjusted for inflation. The problem is that somewhere along the way, you've developed what I call middle-aged money habits that are designed to make you feel responsible and in control, but are actually keeping you trapped in a cycle of financial stress. These aren't the obvious money mistakes like buying lottery tickets or running up credit card debt on vacation. These are the subtle, socially acceptable habits that your friends, your family, and even financial advisors might actually praise you for. But here's the thing about these habits. They're like slow-acting poison for your wealth-building potential. The first habit that's probably keeping you poor in your 40s is what I call lifestyle inflation with justification. And this one is particularly insidious because it doesn't feel like lifestyle inflation at all. It feels like you're finally treating yourself the way a successful adult should. You know that feeling when you walk through Target and instead of buying the cheapest version of everything like you did in your 20s, you actually buy the name brand products because, well, you've worked hard and you deserve quality items, right? Or when you decide to get the premium cable package because you're tired of not having the channels you want to watch after a long day at work. Maybe you upgrade from a basic sedan to an SUV because it's safer for the family and more practical for hauling kids around. Here's where things get psychologically tricky. Every single one of these upgrades feels completely reasonable and justified when you're making the decision. You're not being frivolous or irresponsible. You're making practical choices based on your current income and life circumstances. But what's actually happening is that you're slowly ratcheting up your monthly expenses in a way that makes it nearly impossible to build wealth, regardless of how much money you're making. The math on this is actually pretty terrifying when you run the real numbers. Let's say that over the course of your 30s and early 40s, you've gradually increased your monthly expenses by just $500 across all categories. Better food, better cable, better car, better insurance, better everything. That $500 monthly increase costs you $6,000 per year in extra expenses. But here's the part that most people never calculate. If you had invested that $6,000 annually instead of spending it on lifestyle upgrades and earned a modest 8% return, you'd have an additional $84,000 after 10 years. So those small justifiable upgrades are actually costing you nearly $100,000 in wealth over a decade. That's the hidden cost of lifestyle inflation with justification. The second habit that's keeping you financially stuck is emergency fund hoarding. And before you start typing angry comments, hear me out because this isn't what you think. Having an emergency fund is absolutely critical. But many people in their 40s have turned their emergency fund into a wealth destruction machine without realizing it. Here's how this typically plays out. You read somewhere that you need 3 to 6 months of expenses saved for emergencies. So you diligently save up, let's say $25,000, and you put it in a savings account earning maybe 0.5% interest if you're lucky. You feel responsible and prepared, which you should. But then something interesting happens. You become so psychologically attached to that safety net that you refuse to do anything with money beyond building that emergency fund. The problem isn't having an emergency fund. The problem is treating it like it's your entire financial strategy. I see this constantly with people in their 40s who have $30,000, $50,000, sometimes even $100,000 sitting in savings accounts earning practically nothing, while they complain that they can't afford to invest for retirement. They're so focused on protecting themselves from theoretical emergencies that they're guaranteeing themselves a very real emergency later, which is running out of money in retirement. Here's a better approach that most people in their 40s should consider. Keep 3 months of expenses in a high-yield savings account for true emergencies. Take everything beyond that and invest it in a diversified portfolio. Yes, there's some risk involved, but the bigger risk is letting inflation slowly destroy the purchasing power of your money while you wait for an emergency that might never come. The opportunity cost of keeping too much money in savings is enormous when you're in your 40s and still have 20+ years until retirement. The third habit that's financially destructive is college fund obsession. And this is going to be controversial because saving for your kids' college education is seen as one of the most responsible things you can do as a parent. But here's what I see happening constantly. Parents in their 40s are sacrificing their own retirement savings to fund 529 plans for kids who might not even go to college or who might choose less expensive educational paths. The logic seems sound on the surface. You don't want your kids to graduate with student loan debt, so you're prioritizing their education savings over your own retirement. But this is backwards thinking for several reasons. First, your kids have options for paying for college that you don't have for retirement. They can get student loans, scholarships, work-study programs, or choose more affordable schools. You can't get a loan to fund your retirement. Second, if you don't save adequately for retirement, you're likely to become a financial burden on those same kids you're trying to help. They'll end up supporting you in your old age instead of building their own wealth. Third, and this is the part that's really hard to hear, you might be enabling poor decision-making about college choices by removing the financial incentive for your kids to consider cost when choosing schools. When someone else is paying the bill, it's easy to choose the expensive option without considering whether the value proposition makes sense. Here's what financial experts recommend instead. Prioritize your retirement savings first. Once you're on track to retire comfortably, then start funding college savings. Your kids will respect you more for being financially independent than for paying their college tuition and then struggling financially for the rest of your life. The fourth habit that's keeping you poor is insurance overbuying. And this one is particularly common among people in their 40s because this is when life insurance salespeople start targeting you aggressively. You're at the age where you have dependents, a mortgage, and real financial obligations, so buying life insurance makes perfect sense. But somewhere along the way, insurance companies convinced people that insurance is also an investment vehicle, and that's where things go off the rails financially. Whole life insurance, universal life insurance, variable life insurance. These products are marketed as ways to protect your family while also building wealth. But here's the reality that insurance salespeople don't want you to understand. These products are terrible investments disguised as insurance. The fees are enormous, the returns are mediocre at best, and you're essentially paying thousands of dollars extra every year for the privilege of earning less money than you could with a simple index fund. Here's a better approach. Buy term life insurance for 10-20 times your annual income, which will provide adequate protection for your family at a fraction of the cost. Take the money you would have spent on the premium for whole life insurance and invest it in a diversified portfolio. Over 20 years, the difference in returns will easily be 6 figures in your favor. But insurance salespeople make much higher commissions on whole life policies, so they'll use every psychological trick in the book to convince you that you need the investment component for your financial security. Don't fall for it. The fifth habit that's financially destructive is home equity worship. If you're in your 40s and you've owned your home for a while, you've probably built up substantial equity. And there's something psychologically satisfying about knowing that you own a significant asset. But many people become so focused on paying off their mortgage early that they make terrible financial decisions in the pursuit of being debt-free. You know the mindset I'm talking about. Every extra dollar gets thrown at the mortgage principal because debt is bad and being debt-free is good. It's a simple, emotionally satisfying narrative that makes you feel responsible and in control. But here's where the math gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean potentially devastating to your long-term wealth. If you have a mortgage at 3% or 4% interest and you're throwing extra money at the principal instead of investing it, you're essentially choosing a guaranteed 3 to 4% return instead of a potential 8 to 10% return from the stock market. Over 20 years, this difference is enormous. Let's say you have an extra $500 per month that you're putting toward your mortgage principal. If you invested that money instead in a diversified portfolio earning 8% annually, you'd have approximately $295,000 after 20 years. If you put that same money toward your mortgage, you'd save maybe $60,000 in interest payments over the life of the loan. That's a $235,000 difference in favor of investing. But there's also a psychological component to this that's even more important. When all of your wealth is tied up in your house, you don't actually have wealth. You have an illiquid asset that you can't access without selling your home or taking out another loan. Your house isn't going to pay for your groceries in retirement unless you're willing to downsize or move to a cheaper area. The sixth habit that's keeping you financially stuck is tax refund celebration. And this one reveals a fundamental misunderstanding about how taxes work and how to manage cash flow. Every spring, millions of Americans get excited about their tax refunds like they just won a small lottery. They use the money for vacations, electronics, or other purchases they've been putting off. But here's what's actually happening when you get a large tax refund. You've essentially given the government an interest-free loan for an entire year. Think about this for a second. If you're getting a $3,000 tax refund, that means you overpaid your taxes by $250 every single month for the entire year. That's $250 that could have been invested, used to pay down high-interest debt, or simply earned interest in a savings account. Instead, you gave it to the government for free and then celebrated when they gave you back your own money. The better approach is to adjust your withholdings so that you either owe a small amount at tax time or get a very small refund. Then take that extra $250 per month and do something productive with it. If you invested $250 monthly and earned 8% annually, you'd have over $43,000 after 10 years. That's the opportunity cost of treating tax refunds like windfalls instead of understanding them for what they really are, which is poor cash flow management. The seventh habit that's financially destructive is credit score obsession. Now, having a good credit score is important. It can save you thousands of dollars on mortgages, car loans, and other major purchases. But somewhere along the way, people started treating their credit score like it was more important than their actual net worth. And this leads to some really backwards financial behavior. People will keep credit cards open that they don't use because closing them might lower their credit score. They'll make minimum payments on low-interest debt to maintain their credit mix. They'll finance cars they could afford to pay cash for because they want to build credit history. Here's what's crazy about this mindset. Your credit score is a measure of how good you are at borrowing money and paying it back. Your net worth is a measure of how much wealth you've actually built. These two things are not the same, and sometimes they're actually in conflict with each other. The person with the highest credit score might be someone who's constantly borrowing money and making payments, while the person with the most wealth might rarely borrow money at all. If you're in your 40s and you're making financial decisions based on what will improve your credit score rather than what will improve your net worth, you've got your priorities backwards. Focus on building wealth first. A good credit score will naturally follow when you have assets and stable income. The eighth habit that's keeping you poor is DIY retirement planning, and this one is particularly dangerous because it feels so responsible and self-reliant. You read a few articles about index funds and compound interest, maybe you watch some YouTube videos about retirement planning, and you decide you can manage your own investments without paying fees to a financial advisor. For some people, this approach can work. But for most people in their 40s, DIY retirement planning is like performing surgery on yourself. You might have read about it and you might understand the basic concepts, but you're missing the professional expertise to handle the complex situations that inevitably arise. Here's what typically happens with DIY retirement planning. You start with good intentions and maybe even make some smart decisions initially. But then life gets complicated. The market crashes and you panic sell at the worst possible time. You change jobs and make mistakes with your 401k rollover. You don't understand the tax implications of different account types, so you end up in the wrong investments for your situation. You fail to rebalance your portfolio regularly, so your asset allocation drifts away from your target. These mistakes might not seem significant in the moment, but over 20 years they can easily cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost returns. The fees you pay to a competent financial advisor are generally a fraction of what poor investment decisions will cost you. And most people in their 40s have complex enough financial situations that professional guidance is worth the investment. The ninth habit that's financially destructive is brand loyalty expense. And this one is particularly subtle because it's often disguised as being a smart consumer. You know the mindset I'm talking about. You've found brands that you trust, so you stick with them even when cheaper alternatives would work just as well. You always buy the same brand of toothpaste, the same brand of laundry detergent, the same brand of everything, because you know it works and you don't want to waste time researching alternatives. This seems reasonable on the surface, but it's actually costing you way more money than you realize. Brand loyalty prevents you from taking advantage of sales, comparing prices, and trying generic alternatives that might be 30 to 50% cheaper with identical quality. Over the course of a year, brand loyalty across all your purchases can easily add up to thousands of dollars in unnecessary expenses. And the psychological trap is that each individual purchase seems insignificant. Spending an extra $2 on name brand pasta instead of generic doesn't feel like a big deal. But when you multiply that across hundreds of purchases throughout the year, you're talking about serious money that could be invested for your future. The solution isn't to become an extreme couponer or spend hours researching every purchase. The solution is to become more flexible about brands for everyday items where quality differences are minimal. The 10th habit that's keeping you financially stuck is social spending pressure. And this one is particularly relevant for people in their 40s because this is when your social circle starts making some serious money, which means social activities become more expensive. Your friends want to go to nicer restaurants, take more elaborate vacations, join expensive clubs or gyms, attend concerts or sporting events with premium seating, and there's this subtle pressure to keep up with the group's spending level so you don't feel left out or appear to be struggling financially. The problem is that you might be the only person in your friend group who's actually trying to build long-term wealth. Everyone else might be spending their entire paychecks on lifestyle expenses without worrying about retirement or financial independence. So when you try to keep up with their spending, you're sacrificing your financial future to maintain social relationships in the present. This is a particularly difficult habit to break because it requires setting boundaries with people you care about. You might need to suggest less expensive alternatives, decline certain invitations, or be honest about your financial priorities. The good news is that true friends will understand and support your financial goals. The people who pressure you to spend money you don't have are not really looking out for your best interests. The 11th habit that's financially destructive is convenience purchasing, and this one has gotten significantly worse over the past decade with the rise of delivery apps and online shopping. When you're in your 40s, you're likely at the busiest point in your life. You're managing career responsibilities, family obligations, household maintenance, and everything else that comes with being an adult. So when you're tired after a long day, it's incredibly tempting to just order dinner through DoorDash instead of cooking, or to buy something online and pay for expedited shipping because you need it quickly. These convenience purchases feel reasonable in the moment because your time is valuable and you can afford the extra cost. But when you start tracking how much you're actually spending on convenience, the numbers are staggering. Delivery apps typically add 30 to 50% to the cost of a meal when you factor in service fees, delivery fees, tips, and markups. Amazon Prime and expedited shipping can turn a $20 purchase into a $35 purchase. Grocery delivery services charge premium prices plus fees and tips. If you're spending an extra $200 per month on convenience across all categories, that's $2,400 per year. Over 20 years, that money invested at 8% returns would grow to approximately $118,000. So your convenience purchases are literally costing you six figures in retirement wealth. The 12th and final habit that's keeping you poor in your 40s is something I call analysis paralysis investing. This is when you know you should be investing more aggressively for retirement, but you get so overwhelmed by all the options and conflicting advice that you end up doing nothing or making overly conservative choices. You read articles about the stock market being overvalued, or you worry about the next recession, or you can't decide between different types of retirement accounts, so you just keep putting off making investment decisions. The problem with analysis paralysis is that time is the most important factor in building wealth, and every month you wait to start investing aggressively is a month of compound growth that you can never get back. The person who starts investing $500 per month at age 30 will have significantly more money at retirement than someone who starts investing $1,000 per month at age 45, even though the second person is investing twice as much money. This is the power of compound interest, and it's why waiting for the perfect investment strategy is so costly. The truth is, there's no perfect investment strategy. The best strategy is the one you actually implement consistently over time. Here's what most people in their 40s should probably be doing with their investments, assuming they have stable income and an emergency fund. Put the maximum amount possible into tax-advantage accounts like 401ks and IRAs. Invest that money in low-cost index funds that track the overall stock market. Rebalance annually to maintain your target asset allocation. Ignore daily market fluctuations and news about economic predictions. Stay the course for the next 20 years. This isn't exciting or complicated, but it's effective. Now let's step back and think about the bigger picture here. These 12 habits all have something in common. They feel responsible and reasonable when you're engaging in them. None of them are obviously destructive like gambling or excessive credit card debt. But collectively, they're designed to keep you trapped in a cycle where you're making more money than ever before, but never quite getting ahead financially. And the psychological challenge is that breaking these habits requires you to think differently about money in ways that might feel uncomfortable or counterintuitive. For example, being less generous with your kid's college fund feels selfish. Keeping less money in your emergency fund feels risky. Buying generic brands feels cheap. Declining social invitations feels antisocial. But here's what I want you to understand about wealth building. It's not about making perfect decisions all the time. It's about making consistently better decisions over long periods of time. And the people who build significant wealth in their 40s and 50s are not necessarily smarter or more disciplined than everyone else. They've just developed habits that prioritize long-term wealth building over short-term comfort and social approval. The beautiful thing about being in your 40s is that you still have time to change these patterns. If you can identify which of these habits are affecting your financial progress and start making adjustments, you can dramatically improve your financial trajectory over the next 10-20 years. But the window is closing. Every year you wait to address these issues makes them harder to overcome and reduces the impact that changes will have on your long-term wealth. So there you have it. 12 money habits that might be keeping you poor in your 40s even though you're probably making more money than ever before. The transformation that happens when you start recognizing these patterns isn't just about the money itself. It's about becoming the type of person who builds wealth instead of just earning income. And that identity shift creates ripple effects that extend into every corner of your life in ways you probably never expected. If you're currently staring at a bank account that doesn't reflect your age or income level, don't panic. Start identifying which of these habits are affecting you most and tackle them one at a time. The person you become while breaking these patterns is infinitely more valuable than any amount of money you'll save in the process.